Hey everybody, Brian over at Strong Tower, coming at you for our third session of why brain training is best. So we've been reviewing some key concepts in neurology and how the brain drives movement, and how if we want to improve movement, then the brain really matters as the driver of movement. So in this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about fueling for the brain, so fuel and activation. We're going to talk about that pattern of fueling, and then two basic jobs that the brain has. So the first is survival. The brain takes up a lot of energy. So it's this relatively small organ in relation to the rest of the body. Doesn't weigh much compared to the rest of the body, a very small percentage of your actual body weight, but it burns about 30% of your daily energy. And if you do neurotraining or brain training, it might even be a little bit higher than that, because you're increasing the demand, or you're increasing the neural load, meaning you're also increasing the metabolic load from an energy standpoint. So we want to fuel it well so that it can perform well, obviously. There's two jobs the brain has. One is survival. And again, it's thinking about it from a survival standpoint, it's going to conserve energy. So if the brain sees a way to kind of move to the path of least resistance, or use the least amount of energy possible, conserve energy when it thinks you need to, or it seems like there's a survival need, it's going to do that. So energy conservation, kind of an interesting concept. And then movement. So second job is movement, and that's sort of what we do at Strong Tower. So again, you can kind of see how the two concepts are so closely related and important. Two things that the brain needs to stay alive: fuel, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second, and then activation. So activation, movement is a really key one. Other things, memory, tasks, language acquisition, doing some of the cognitive work that some of what we do here. There's great places like Learning RX that really focus on the cognitive elements too. And so activation, those would fall into that category. From a fuel standpoint, your brain needs two types of fuel to survive and thrive. It needs oxygen, meaning are we breathing and breathing well, not just are you breathing. Because from a survival standpoint, we know we can do that, but are you doing a good job of balancing your oxygen and carbon dioxide levels? And breathing drills can help with that. Second is glucose. Doesn't mean that you have to eat spoonfuls of sugar. In fact, most people probably wouldn't recommend it in the health and fitness industry. Your brain can turn other things like fats and amino acids into glucose. But glucose, if your blood sugar is low, or feeling tired, lethargic, and you need to perform at that time, eating a piece of fruit is a great way to get those glucose levels back up and give your brain what it needs. On the brain picture over here, you can see that the fueling happens sort of logically. If we think about fuel and blood flow coming up, it's going to come from bottom to top, and then from back to front. So you can see like your survival areas, like your brainstem and your cerebellum, are going to get fueled first. So they're going to get blood flow and nutrients first and take care of all the vital organs, vital functions for survival. The last place to get fuel, interestingly, is the frontal lobe. And that's like where your cognitive tasks and executive functions are happening. So when people say that they get brain fog or they get tired in the afternoon and it's harder to focus at work, maybe part of why we're running low on fuel, we're not getting enough to that frontal lobe. So what can movement and sensory input do to improve your executive function and your frontal lobe activation? Because brain areas that fuel together affect each other. So if you fuel this area, the brain soaks up blood and nutrients like a sponge. It's going to affect the areas next to it. Also, from a neuroplasticity standpoint, which means the brain can change and adapt over time, even in your 50s and 60s, and that can be good or bad depending on the input that you give it. From a neuroplasticity standpoint, neurons that fire together wire together. So when we create like a co-activation in one area, we're affecting that next area. So if we give you sensory activation in your sensory cortex, you can see from a feeling standpoint, your sensory kind of right here, Your motor cortex is right next to it, prefrontal motor cortex, and the areas that drive movement or motor. Those come after sensory from a feeling standpoint, but they impact each other. So if we've done like skin stimulation, you've tested like vibration, sharp, dull, hot, cold, different areas of the body. And now you know why sensory is super critical to improve motor or movement, because again, neurons that fire together wire together, and when we activate one area, we're improving the area next to it from a feeling standpoint. So is it really good to take a movement break at work if you're having trouble focusing or you need to make a great decision? Probably. Is it good to do some sensory input and movement together? Probably even better. So those are kind of the key take-homes from part 3. We'll be coming to you in about a week with part 4 of why brain training is best. Thanks.